Let's talk to Dr. Ian Higginson from the Royal College of Emergency Medicine. Dr. Higginson, thank you very much for joining us this morning. You heard Gavin's story there. Is that a typical story, and is that something we're going to be hearing more and more about?
Good morning, guys, and thank you for having us on the show. Sadly, the sort of story that you've heard about this morning is all too typical of what's going on out there at the moment. It's quite hard for us when we come on your show to describe what's going on out there repeatedly without catastrophizing. But I think increasingly now we're in the emergency care profession, we're getting really worried and really quite angry about what is happening to our patients and what our staff are having to deal with. And these examples are all too common.
Okay, so someone calls an ambulance today. Typically, what will happen?
Well, there's a lot of it depends in there, but what we know is happening is that too many ambulances are parked in hospital car parks and they can't get out to patients. And they're parked in our car parks because there's no room at the inn in our hospitals. And this is getting worse and worse throughout the country. So, for instance, overnight, I know that there will be elderly, vulnerable, frail patients who will have spent the whole night on an uncomfortable hospital bed or trolley in a corridor with the lights on all the time, with noise going on all the time, with emergency care staff struggling to meet their basic needs. Meanwhile, in our car parks, there would have been patients stuck in ambulances experiencing exactly the same thing. And that means that the poor patients at home who need an ambulance can't get those ambulances because they're with us. So all along the line, patients are suffering as a result of the current situation in our emergency department.
So the whole flow, the system, is not working. Who needs to fix it? Who can fix it?
Well, who needs to fix it? This falls squarely with our political and NHS leadership. And I think one of the things that is making us angry is that whilst our politicians have been playing their games of thrones or eating kangaroo bottoms in the jungle, these sorts of things have been going on and getting progressively worse without any effective action being evident to those of us on the front line. And responsibility for that falls absolutely squarely with our political and health service leadership across the four nations of the UK. And it's those individuals who need to really start to roll their sleeves up and get stuck into this problem. And what do they need to do? Well, I think first of all, they need to realise that there's a problem, accept there's a problem, and fess up to the fact that there's a problem. I think secondly, they need to start listening to staff rather than management consultants. And then I think finally they need to swallow their pride and really start to look at the solutions that are needed right now if we're going to find our way out of this in the long term.
You have used the word angry twice in our conversation. Frustration is evident. Strike action, is that the answer? Is that where your anger has taken you?
So I can't comment on the details of strike action because of our position as a Royal College, but I work with emergency nurses, junior doctors and paramedics every day. These people would not be taking the sort of action that they feel they need to take to be heard lightly. They're dedicated professionals, absolutely, who want to deliver a good service for their patients. But I think what all of us see is that unless the problems that we see now are fixed, there's a risk that we won't have these staff long term. We've got to keep hold of these valuable staff. So I absolutely understand the anger and frustration they're feeling, and we can see why they feel it necessary to take this action, even though for them it's heartbreaking to have to do so.
The Department of Health, I'm sure you're aware of this statement, but I'm going to read it to you anyway and get your reaction. We recognise the pressures the NHS is under and are taking urgent action to support the ambulance service and staff so they can deliver high-quality care to patients. This includes an extra £500 million to speed up the hospital discharge and free up beds, creating the equivalent of at least 7,000 more beds this winter, improving patient flow through hospitals and getting ambulances back swiftly on the road. This will be supported by an additional £6.6 billion in the NHS over the next 2 years.
Yeah, well, sadly, that's the sort of bland stuff that we've got used to hearing and which really means nothing on the front line. So we can talk about opening up extra hospital beds, but unless we've got nurses other staff and doctors to staff those beds, that's all pie in the sky. And it really is no use chucking money at the last minute at these problems for utterly predictable problems in the absence of proper strategic planning to find our way out of this. So I guess there's a high degree of cynicism amongst those of us who work in the health service where we hear this sort of bland nonsense coming out from the Department of Health. A lot of it's very well-meaning, but it really means nothing on the ground because a lot of it is simply short-term management or fanciful management, relying on staff who simply aren't there and who are increasingly choosing to leave the health service because of what is going on.
I think you've made your views very, very clear. Thank you for that, Dr. Ian Higginson from the Royal College of Emergency Medicine. Thank you for your time with us this morning.